Hey guys, so right now we are in the ninth part of the Second Crusade series by Kings and Generals. If you want to watch the original video, the link is down in the description down below. And if you want to help support me in any way, shape, or form, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and maybe consider being a YouTube or Patreon member. It would help me out quite a lot. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let us continue with the Second Crusade series by Kings and Generals.
Had been sailing from the west. Upon hearing of the papal call, the English Crusaders, together with Flemish and Cologne contingents, attempted to sail to the Holy Land along the Atlantic coastline. The Anglo-Norman contingent was commanded by Hervé de Glanville and Simon of Dover, while the Flemish, Frisian and Northern Rhinelander contingent was led by Arnold IV, Count of Aarschot. Because of the growing textile commerce between the British Isles and the Low Countries, the idea of a combined Anglo-Flemish military venture seemed practically natural. The English harbour of Dartmouth was chosen as the main rally point. After gathering the combined fleet on the 27th of April 1147, its force numbered around 200 ships, with an estimated maximum of 20,000 crusaders on board. The more likely number is probably around 10,000. Along with preparations, a strict code of conduct was placed on pilgrims, forbidding taking unnecessary baggage or partaking in frivolous activities. Due to cultural and language differences, harsh punishments were put in motion to improve discipline. With intensive preparations in motion, the Crusader fleet finally departed Dartmouth on the 19th of May 1147. Initially, the voyage was going well for the pilgrims, until the fleet moved around Brittany. While sailing through the Bay of Biscay, a sudden heavy storm scattered the crusading contingents, with many ships landing separately on Galician and Asturian coasts. Luckily for the Crusaders, the locals were friendly and helped to navigate them safely through Biscay. It didn't take long for the news to spread across Iberia about the Crusaders' ships, which gave the Iberian rulers an opportunity to utilize Anglo-Flemish assistance in acquiring new territories from the Muslims. The timing couldn't have been better for the Christians. The Almoravid Empire was crumbling due to internal strife and divisions, marking the beginning of the Second Taifa period. Even more worryingly for the Almoravid regime in Cordoba, a new power was arising in southern Morocco, as the new Berber Almohad dynasty began to gradually push the Almoravids out of Africa, forcing them onto the defensive. Divided into smaller states, taifas, the Muslim lands in Iberia were easy prey for the Christian rulers, including the King of Portugal, Alfonso I. Predicting the Crusaders' route through the Iberian coastline, the Portuguese king realized that with the Crusaders' aid, he could fulfill his long-time dream of capturing Lisbon. In 1142, Alfonso failed to capture the city.
Okay, in 1142, a group of Anglo-Norman crusaders on their way to Jerusalem were invited by King Alfonso of Portugal to participate in an attempt to capture the Almoravid-controlled city of Lisbon. However, they were too few in number to be able to sustain a long siege of the city.
However, this time, Alfonso had strengthened his position, making significant territorial gains in central Portugal. Just 3 months before the Crusaders' departure, King Alfonso began his offensive through the Tag River Valley, seizing the vital city of Santarém. This allowed the Portuguese ruler to tighten his grip over the city and secure his supply lines for the upcoming campaign. Whether the Crusades' cooperation with Portugal was orchestrated or spontaneous is debatable, but the consensus is that, regardless of motives, King Alfonso could not miss such an opportunity. When the Crusaders bypassed...
Yeah, this is a great opportunity. This feels like another side quest. Like, I kind of like that the goal was, alright, let's go to the Holy Land and help, and then everyone's just kind of doing their own side things, right? Like with the battle with the Wends in, like, Northern Europe and out here. Just everyone's kind of using the vague term of crusade to just fight and fight everyone around, you know? I kind of really like that. So, that's interesting.
Corunna, and on the 19th of June reached Oporto harbour. They were welcomed in great splendour by the local bishop Pedro Pitois, who received instructions from Alfonso ordering him to provide any help for passing crusaders. Furthermore, he asked the bishop to persuade the pilgrims to move on to Lisbon with the Portuguese king. While celebrating a mass in Oporto's cathedral, Bishop Pedro shared the initial plans with the arrivals. The English Crusaders decided to wait for the remaining contingents to arrive, so that they could make a joint decision. When the Flemish and Frisian ships arrived, thanks to the assistance of Breguet's Archbishop John, the Crusaders set sail for Lisbon, and by the end of June 1147, the Christian fleet had reached the estuary of the Tagus River, while King Alfonso marched from Santarém with his 10,000-strong army. The Almoravid garrison, although strong in numbers and well-equipped, lacked a fleet that could prevent the Crusaders from landing. The only few boats that the Moors possessed were easily repelled by the approaching Latin ships. The Crusaders landed on the western side of the city. There, the Anglo-Normans set their camp, guarding the ships, while the Frisians and the Flemish guarded the eastern side with their camp near the St. Vincent Monastery. The Portuguese guarded the remaining area to the north. Initially, both Crusader groups sent their leaders to the Portuguese camp to discuss their further collaboration. Alfonso argued that the city should be jointly taken, and in return for their service, he would help the Crusaders receive absolution from their sins, instead of going all the way to Jerusalem. King Alfonso's proposal had opened a rift between the Crusaders. The part of the English contingent from Hastings, led by William Veal and his brother Ralph, recalled their service as mercenaries during Alfonso's previous siege. A heated argument between the king and his mercenaries then resulted in the Norman departure. They claimed that the Portuguese king attempted to deceive the Crusaders by avoiding mentioning anything about the loot. They also argued for bypassing Lisbon and seeking smaller Muslim towns to plunder along the way to Jerusalem. The lack of clarity regarding spoils from captured Lisbon also stirred the Flemish contingent, who began to encourage other Crusaders to abandon Lisbon. Angered by the Veal brothers' actions, Hervé de Glanville decided to step in, and in a fiery speech condemned his opponents for valuing profits and enriching themselves over following the Crusade's spiritual motives. When he finished his talk, William lost his following, and as a result, the majority of the Crusaders favoured the siege of Lisbon and began talks with the king.
Dude, Alfonso is making some really big moves. I like that. Dude really took advantage of this crusade for his own goal. Like, he's like, the way he's spinning this, right? Like, you know, forget the Holy Land. The real crusade is right here in Portugal. Like, just help us and then everything will be fine. I love that. The dude is like, yeah, he's like manipulating everyone, or rather redirecting them to better suit his goals. So that's hilarious.
During the talks, Alfonso and the Crusaders agreed that the city would be handed over to Alfonso in exchange for the aid, and an official oath that Alfonso would not abandon the siege. With the treaty signed and hostages exchanged, both sides made preparations for the upcoming attack. At first, the Christians tried to scare off the Muslim defenders and demanded Lisbon's surrender. However, the Almoravids refused. The Great Siege of Lisbon was about to begin. On the 1st of July 1147, the English Crusaders launched an attack on Lisbon's suburbs, located under the western walls and the citadel. After intense arrow barrages, the Anglo-Normans managed to repel the Almoravid militia, securing one of the suburb districts. From then on, the fighting would only intensify, as Lisbon's citizens began to barricade houses, fighting with the Crusaders for every inch of ground. Furthermore, militia units could also rely on archers and ballistae stationed at Lisbon's walls. Nevertheless, the English Crusaders managed to reach the Almacaval cemetery. Here's where the fighting took a heavy toll on both sides, with the defenders making night attacks. Still, the Crusaders held the cemetery, repulsing Almoravid forces several times. Eventually, as the Muslim casualties grew, the defenders decided to withdraw behind the city walls. The English pursued the Muslims all the way to the gate, but due to the Almoravids' intense fire, they had to withdraw as well. However, on their way back to the cemetery, some of the Anglo-Normans managed to find Moorish cellars full of provisions. The garrison failed to store all of the supplies inside the city. Taking advantage of this blunder, the English seized all the food, and thus the lack of food began to exert a gradual pressure on the defenders of Lisbon.
I think these are going like, very interesting. Yeah, I think they're definitely gonna take it.
The next day, Almoravid militia and Lisbon's citizens made a great sally out on the Flemish side, and managed to push them back from the walls. It was only by King Alfonso's personal intervention that the attackers were outflanked and forced to withdraw. With the suburbs and the surrounding area secured, the besieging armies could now focus on preparing all the necessary siege engines. On the Flemish and German side, a battering ram was constructed that was meant to be covered by 5 mangonels, while the English built a huge 95-foot siege tower. The first attack proved disastrous for the Christians. Because the Flemish mangonel's range was too small and could only damage several towers, this meant that the ram couldn't approach the walls, as Muslim fire from their ballistae almost managed to destroy it. On the western side of Lisbon, as the siege tower was getting close to the walls, it got stuck in the sand and couldn't be moved. This factor was used by Muslim archers and ballistae, who annihilated the siege tower after 4 days of bombardment. For weeks, the Crusaders were demoralized by these events. Still though, they decided to continue the siege, and moved all the ships onto the shore. On the other side, the Muslims did not have the time to celebrate their successes either. Their supplies were running low, and the defenders tried to seek help from the Almoravid city of Evora. However, the messengers were caught, and upon reading the letters, the Christians' morale rose once again. What was worse for Lisbon, the Almoravids in Evora had signed a truce with Alfonso, which meant that no aid was coming. Emboldened, the Crusaders began to raid the local countryside of neighbouring Sintra and Almada, with mixed results. Aided by King Alfonso's Pisan engineer and siege equipment, the Portuguese and Crusaders renewed the attempt to break through Lisbon's defences. Using Portuguese resources, both the English and Flemish began to dig tunnels in order to undermine the city's walls. Furthermore, thanks to improved engineering expertise, new siege machinery was being built, a strengthened siege tower and 2 massive mangonels that reportedly required 100 men to operate and could fire 5 stones per hour.
Wow.
With such fierce firepower installed, the Crusade...
Yeah, Lisbon has no chance. No aid is coming, and the engineering prowess of the Crusaders seems to be really efficient. Yeah, I don't see them, like, there's no way they can survive this, right? Like, and they also don't have any naval superiority, so they're basically screwed. Even in like a war, even if this turns into an attrition thing, there's no way they're gonna like outlast it. Their resources are already like plummeting, and they have no hope for aid. They've basically lost, I feel like, in all fronts.
Could renew the city's bombardment, while the tunnels were gradually approaching the Almoravid walls. The English tunnel was built too high and too close to the walls. When the defenders realized what was happening, they fired on that place so intensely that the work there had to be stopped. More progress was made on the other side, where on the 16th of October, the tunnel finally reached the walls of Lisbon. After setting fire under the target, a 20-foot high section of the eastern wall collapsed. Rejoicing, the Flemish rushed through the debris to break through. Though initially the attackers took the Muslims by surprise, the defenders quickly regrouped, denying the chance for the Flemish to take the city. When the Anglo-Norman contingent heard of the Flemish successes, they decided to fill the gap and aid the Crusaders' assault. Much to their surprise, instead of Flemish enthusiasm upon arrival of their fellow Christians, the English were blocked by remaining continental contingents and denied passage, stating that it was their breach,
and
Anglo-Normans were not allowed.
Oh my guys, come on. Let's just put this aside. Let's put aside the pride and just go and win. Oh my goodness.
Infighting only helped the Muslims, as they used this time to form a barricade that could hardly be breached. Angered by the Flemish behaviour, on the 20th of October, the Anglo-Normans and the Portuguese finally deployed a siege tower that aimed at the walls close to Porto de Ferro on the western side, close to Lisbon's harbour. After a speech by the Archbishop of Braga, the siege tower moved forward. It didn't take long before it had to withstand all of the Muslims' firepower, as the Almoravid garrison moved ballistae from the eastern sections of the wall to repel the Christian attack. Despite the bombardment, the siege tower held firm. Once a fire broke out in one of the tower's sections, but a few English knights managed to put it out. As the tower gradually progressed towards the city walls, one night, a tide of the Tagus River managed to isolate the siege tower from the Anglo-Norman camp. Alerted by this change of circumstance, the Almoravid garrison sallied out, attempting to burn down the siege tower from the inside. However, over 100 English and Lotharingian knights managed to hold their positions on their own for 2 days straight, despite being overwhelmed at least 10-1.
Dang, my goodness. So much keeps happening here between the sand and now this. Like, like, nature itself is, like, trying to stop the Crusaders right now.
On the 22nd of October, the tide receded, allowing the Crusaders to finally place the siege tower under the walls. The Crusaders' archers and crossbowmen managed to neutralize the archers from above, and it was only a matter of time before the attackers would mount the walls.
Wow.
Starved, being on their own and pushed back from the wall, the Muslims decided to ask for a day of truce in order to consider the conditions of surrender. As a gesture of goodwill, the Muslims sent hostages, to which the Crusaders agreed. But much to the anger of Anglo-Norman nobles, the hostages were taken by the king's representative, Fernando Captivo. A brawl began to take place, and it was only by Hervé of Glanville's intervention that the situation didn't escalate.
This Hervé guy is really kind of carrying the morale. Like, he's the reason some people stayed, and he's, like, keeping the peace. Like, you can tell by his image of wearing the helmet, he's as committed to the Crusades as a man can be. He's not in it for the gain, the material worldly gain. He's in it for God. Like, you know, he's in it for the spiritual purpose, which probably makes his intentions probably the most, at least in that regard, the purest so far we've seen of many Crusaders, who, while the religious, spiritual aspect is prevalent, a lot of them do kind of want something out of it. Like, what do I gain? Like, what land? What riches? But now, he seems like he's only in it mainly for the spiritual benefit, which makes him kind of like, his zeal is powerful. You know what I mean? Also, it helps that his, like, profile picture is just a helmet. Like, you can kind of tell, like, he's in it, right? For the love of the game, rather.
Almoravids returned with an answer. They stated that only the King of Portugal could discuss the terms of surrender. They proposed that the city would be handed over to the Portuguese. The English, thanks to Glanville's rhetoric, agreed to those demands.
Dude, Alfonso lucked out having him, Hervé, as, like, an ally, you know, and managing to get him involved with all this. Again, Alfonso saw the Crusade, and he was like, dang, let me use it to really accomplish my goals. I respect that. Like, the dude really, I respect the hustle from him.
The only groups unsatisfied were the Flemish and Crusaders from Cologne, who wanted the city to be handed to them, together with all the loot. Using the hostage exchange, some of the Flemish and German mob entered the city and began to pillage it. When King Alfonso heard what was going on, he was furious. The Crusaders dishonored his word. He even ordered some of his troops to arrest the looters. Trying to calm down the situation, the Crusader nobility, including Glanville, swore an oath that during their stay in Portugal, they would swear fealty to Alfonso. They sent their men to pacify and punish their plundering companions. It was on the 24th of October, 1147, when the official procession finally entered Lisbon, during which Alfonso's flag was raised in Lisbon's highest tower, and lavish celebrations began to take place. The Crusaders' celebrations, however, were short-lived, as the Flemish and Rhinelanders yet again began to use the celebrations as a—
Yo, the Flemish need to chill out. Like, you've already won. Like, just... Oh my gosh, the Flemish. They've been the bigger, you know, they've been the ones seemingly causing a lot of issues, definitely, because they want the loot. They really want the loot, but, you know, oh well.
Means to plunder the city, killing Muslims, Christians, and even the local Mozarabe bishop. This resulted in Lisbon's inhabitants leaving the city en masse. The only contingent that held to their word was the English. To calm the Portuguese ruler yet again, the English offered that one of their churchmen, Gilbert of Hastings, was to be elected Lisbon's first bishop, to which Alfonso agreed, marking the first established good diplomatic ties between both nations.
Wow.
After the Anglo-Normans...
You know, that's interesting, because later on in history, Portugal and, like, the UK, like England, were on very good terms, actually, like, as allies. So that's kind of interesting to see that kind of origin there, I guess, of, or one of the earlier instances of the two sides getting along, you know? Yeah, again, like, England has just been like, yeah, we're in it. We're gonna help you, Alfonso. No questions asked. Like, when Hervey took charge, he's like, we're gonna help you. No questions asked. We're on your side. No gain. This is all for the cause, you know? Like, I don't know. It's really interesting. This has been an interesting, like, other theater we've been covering, because the Second Crusade is taking place in a lot of other places except the Holy Land at the moment. So this is really cool to see.
Managed to restrain their Flemish counterparts, on November 1st, churches were reinstated by the newly appointed Bishop Gilbert, marking the final chapter in the Siege of Lisbon. The Crusaders decided to stay in Portugal for the winter, until on the 1st of February they departed Lisbon. What happened with this crusading venture next is quite unclear, as the main source responsible for documenting the Siege of Lisbon, De Expugnatione Lisbonensi, states that the Crusaders had reached Jerusalem. However, the sources in the Outremer do not support this claim. It is probable that the expedition split, with some of the Crusaders deciding to settle down in Lisbon. At the same time, the remaining groups joined the crusading movement on the eastern side of the Iberian Peninsula, with most likely only a handful of knights arriving in the Outremer. Although the Anglo-Flemish Crusade in Portugal did not help shift the balance of power in the Levant, it inadvertently managed to score one of the greatest victories for Christendom during the Second Crusade. With Lisbon captured, the newly established Kingdom of Portugal could continue its expansion into southwestern Iberia, allowing it to become the territory of Portugal as we know it today.
Wow. So that was like Portugal's origin story, at least as a kingdom. I guess, yeah, something good came out of this, huh? You know, usually like in Crusades, things kind of fall apart. This was a good one in the long run. So, yeah, W on the Crusaders. And that was a cool, like, you know, other adventure. So we have like 3 more episodes of the Second Crusade. I'm wondering how can this end. So I'm going to end the video right here, and I'll continue with the Second Crusade tomorrow. Bye everyone.